Welcome to Books in Review. I'm Emily Seate. My guest is Jeffrey W. Turner, who has written his first book entitled Notes to Stephanie. It's middle-aged love stories and life stories. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Can you tell me about middle-aged love stories? How are they different?
Well, in a way, like I said on the back cover of the book, the young folks are not the only ones that meet somebody and fall in love. And people in their middle ages and older do the same thing. I guess what's different is some of the things that go on in your life that are different than would be found with a younger person. For example, your kids are grown or about to be grown, you're getting older, your parents are getting older, and the dynamics of the family change. So I think that's probably what sets it apart from something else like that. Yeah.
Yeah, some people would call it bringing baggage, but that's not how you look at it, I can tell.
Right. I mean, I think there's just some things that are always present in life, and I think because those things are so universal, that's why some of it will appeal to people you might not think. I let some of my friends that are guys read it, and I thought, oh, they're not going to like it. And the total opposite was relayed back to me. They thought it was really great. One friend of mine, the one I really thought wouldn't like it, he read it in one night. And it's like, whoa.
Well, it has to do probably, I mean, I think it's unusual to find a man who can write a sensitive book like this. So, the book is called Notes to Stephanie, so who is Stephanie?
Stephanie is my ex-wife, unfortunately, but I met her 3 years ago in a class, quite by accident. And we just hit it off immediately and got married. She's a school teacher in this area. She's got a PhD in educational psychology and her master's and bachelor's in various education degrees. And so basically she's a school teacher. Yeah.
What motivated you to write her notes?
Well, there's a little story behind that. I never had done that before with an ex-girlfriend or anybody like that. And one day I was driving to my client at the time, which was over in Allen. So I had a little bit of a long drive. So I would leave early to get over there early, beat the traffic. And one morning there was this very beautiful sunrise with, you know, blues and pinks and grays and oranges. And I kind of thought, well, that's really beautiful. I'll write her something about that. So I found an image on the internet that kind of reminded me of it and wrote a little note about it, which is in the book. And that's how it got started. At first they were just very short, one paragraph or two, but later they evolved into the full page format, which is what most of the book has.
You just talked about the sky, and do you wonder, you also talked about the sky, and in other ones you speak about clouds, and why the sky? What's the importance there?
One part of that is I've always liked the weather. I'm kind of a weather nut a little bit, but also on certain days when there were certain types of skies and certain vistas, it just made me feel like I was alive, and you would see a grander view of the universe than what you were seeing just in your own little neighborhood. My favorite type of sky is the kind where you've got the high, thin cirrus clouds streaming across, because they start from way below the horizon behind where you can't see, and they go the other way where you can't see. So that kind of made me feel like I was seeing something bigger than just my regular neighborhood or where I was.
Another thing I noticed about your stories, as far as the theme was concerned, that you talk about choices a lot, and I especially liked forks in the road. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, forks in the road, which is also kind of related to the two beads notes, too, in a way, that I'm not one that thinks all the outcomes in life are predestined by, you know, whatever force you believe in or don't believe in. And I think what happens to you on any other day is a result of the choices you made going back who knows how far. The choices you make create circumstances, and further choices create another set of circumstances, and so on and so forth. So you've got different choices. You could go one way or the other, but you don't know where you've gone until you get there. So that's really what I was talking about in forks in the road.
In my own life, I've found that it's not usually you don't have an either or. You have about 3 or 4 or 5 ways you could go.
Well, that's very true, too.
Surely. You seem to return to themes throughout the book, and one of them is a theme of disappointment. And your heart was torn out. I was wondering what you were thinking about when you wrote that.
Well, that really relates to a hard time she was having more. But there's a couple of things to that. One, life is a series of ups and downs and goods and bads and yins and yangs. You can't escape it. Nobody has a perfect life like you see on a TV show or something like that. It just isn't there. But the one you're talking about was a time when there were some issues with some of the grown kids. And that kind of stuff kind of really beset us for a long time. And that was written around one of those times when she was having a hard time with her two. Other days it was my two, or all of them. But that's why I wrote it. And I was trying to write it to her to kind of console her, to say, well, the kids are going to do stuff, you can't control it. You're more of a spectator now. The analogy I would use to her is like playing football. I used to play football in high school, and I was out there on the field, and the coach was telling me what to do. The coach, figuratively speaking, would be the parent. The person on the field would be the child. Well, when your kids are grown, you're up in the stands. You're not down there on the field. So I was trying to explain that concept to her.
You almost have to be invited in.
If you're invited in, that's
exactly.
true. But that was kind of the point of it.
Well, that was wonderful.
Yeah.
You mentioned beads, but you gave two different notes that are one's beads and one's more beads. So beads are evidently very important.
Well, one of her hobbies was making jewelry with all these old beads and stuff. And we'd go different places to buy stuff for the hobby. You know, she had turquoise and plastic and metal and all kinds of stuff. And she would make the jewelry and wear it to school, and the teachers would always go, "Where'd you get that?" Well, she made it. But the point of the beads is, imagine someone who does that for a hobby. They're sitting at a table, they've got, you know, dozens of these little containers with these different things in, and a wire or a string to put the beads on. Kind of the theme of those two notes is, you could think of the line as the course of your life, but the beads you pick and the order you pick them in are some of the choices that you do and some of the things that happen to you. So the whole string of the beads was one way to think about what happened in life. You choose stuff, things happen, but everything strung together is really what happens to you when you live.
It's almost like choices is the real theme of the entire book, and you use different analogies to exemplify it.
Well, I think that's real important. I mean, like I said, I'm not the type of person that think things are predestined. Some things are random. But a lot of things that happen are simply because you chose something or another, even though you may not realize it at the time when you make the decision.
Yeah, the awareness of the choice is not always there.
That's right.
Tell me what you were feeling when you wrote family.
Family goes back to something, again, she wanted. She was an orphan. She has no family at all. Her father of her kids, her first husband, died in a car wreck, and he was an orphan that was adopted. And then his parents died, so she has no extended family. So one thing we talked about when we were dating and getting engaged was one of the things she really wanted was to be part of a family. So part of the stuff I talked about in family was how my mom would treat her, that my mom would talk to her and be nice to her and stuff like that. And she would call her my mom sometimes too. So I was trying to paint the picture to her that she was part of a family. And of course, she didn't really know how some of those things worked, but I guess that was part of the thing too. Well, here's what a mom does, or mother-in-law, I should say. But that was the theme and the reason for writing that.
I understand. When you have never had it, you don't always know when you're getting it.
Yes, I think that's true.
The acknowledgement, from a parental acknowledgement.
Well, yeah, it's just if you never were around something like that, except through a foster parent or something, it's still not the same as having a real blood relative or relative by marriage. Yeah.
I think sweet spot must be a Texanism.
Maybe. Maybe.
I was wondering what was going through your mind when you wrote Sweet Spot.
Well, that one was kind of a recognition and a cautionary tale at the same time. We had had a bunch of turmoil in the early part of our marriage, some of which I allude to in the book, and also I go into some detail in the sequel, which we'll talk about maybe in a little bit. But she was feeling that finally a bunch of things had fell into place with job and family and some other things. And I kind of ended it with a little bit of a cautionary tale. That sentence where I write, "Just remember, all glory is fleeting." And that's a line off the movie Patton, if you've ever seen that. At the very end of the movie, Patton's standing out there dejected in Austria because he's been relieved of command. And there's this background voice that says, in the days of the Roman Empire, and when they had a triumph, the emperor or the Roman consulate or general leading the triumph in glory through the streets of Europe, a slave or someone whispered to him, basically, "This is nice, but all glory is fleeting." In other words, it's nice now, but brace yourself, because something not so nice may be about to happen. So it was a recognition of some good things that were happening, but it was a cautionary tale to just stay on your toes and be aware that something may ruin that nice tone.
You also talked about giving and taking, and giving and receiving, and especially in the one called Giving Your All, and you also talked about half empty and half full glasses.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you?
Well, a couple of things on that. My personality, I guess I'm kind of the glass half full guy, but I'm not just negative on everything. I kind of say, prepare for the worst, but hope for the best. So if something really bad happens, maybe you don't take it as bad. If something good happens, then it's that much the better. And on giving, the part about her, say, giving it all, for example, that you were referring to, she would really care deeply about those kids she was teaching. But you can only care so much. There's this many kids, only this many hours in the day, and you get a new crop of them every year, every semester. So that was kind of how that evolved.
In Good Weekend, I'd like you to read a little of that.
Okay.
There's a paragraph on page 76, if you don't mind.
Sure don't. I just need to get on my cheater middle-aged deals. Which page again?
76.
Okay.
Should be the first tag.
Yeah. Okay, second paragraph.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where it's marked.
Yes, I say, in short, we have found our way again with each other, my Stephanie. When we are mad at each other, one might tend to think all is lost, but not so, my sweetie, all is found with each other once more. We both remembered that many things that drew us together in the first place, didn't we? And we recognize better some of the things that do cause some tension. We will keep adjusting for those things. We must always remember that the facets of our beings that attract greatly outweigh the things that sometimes repel us from each other. Well, that's kind of a recognition that, couples, even though they have a lot in common, they do have some differences. And that when you get into a fuss, you tend to think things, oh, this is just blah, 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 and the other person's this and that and that and that we can't say. So what that kind of says is we're fussing, we recognize that, and we're back to normal. That's kind of the meaning of that paragraph, because that's what happened.
Earlier in adult playtime, you speak of compromise and adjustment. And do you think relationships require compromise and adjustment?
Well, I think they do, because again, if people were carbon copies, no one would ever fuss. You would do the same things all the time and stuff like that. But people are different, even when they have things in common. They still have differences sometimes in some of the things they want to do or don't want to do and things like that. So you can't always just go off in your own direction when you're with somebody. You have to seek some kind of equilibrium with each other that tries to accommodate each other's interests like that, but also gives just as much, if not more importance, to being the couple that brought you together in the first place.
You expand on this in the one called Liking Each Other. Why is it important to like each other?
Well, for example, you could have somebody in your family that you love. Let's say an uncle, but he's a real SOB or something like that. Their family, their blood, their kin, you may love them, but some of the stuff they do you may not like. So I think for couples, you have to have that like part of it. You can't just be gritting your teeth all the time and keep things in some kind of equilibrium and happy and fun and all that. So the difference between like and love, I think, is that, especially when it relates to family.
One thing I remember a long time ago, I heard a friend of mine who was pregnant at the time say something that just startled me. She said, I know I'm going to love my child. I hope I like it.
Well, I think that's true with
Very
kids.
interesting.
Well, all of our kids are college age. My son's about to graduate. My daughter's a sophomore. And as they become adults more than children, even though they're both legally adults, they do stuff sometimes that you wouldn't do or you don't like. But a lot of times you do have to just grit your teeth and cut them some slack, because that's part of growing up and learning what works, what doesn't work, what's right, what's wrong. You can't just, going back to the football team analogy.
And sometimes it's more important to determine what works and what doesn't work.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. Could you, back to the liking part, could you read the first paragraph on page 78?
Yeah.
It's not far from where we were.
Right.
Because I think that's very important, what you say.
Yeah. Okay. Indeed, we do like each other at the same time that we love each other, my Stephanie dear. Truly, that is a sign that we will be together when other couples disintegrate and part ways. Even when either or both of our rotten sides rear their ugly heads from time to time, I like liking you, that is for sure.
I like liking you. That's
Yeah,
good.
that's a little bit redundant. That may not
That's
be
good.
perfect English,
No,
but
it gets the point across.
yeah, yeah.
And you said you had a fear of being left.
Uh-huh.
You talk about dragons, and I was wondering
Yeah.
if dragons are fears in disguise.
Well, that's part of it. That note you talked to, fear of being left, that kind of goes back to her being an orphan. She didn't have that kind of familial stability that most of us have.
Grounding.
But the concept of dragons is something I got from reading the poet Maria Rainier Rilke, the German poet. And in his Letters to Young Poets book, he's writing to this other poet somewhere in France or something like that. And he makes this statement, which was also on the Beauty and Beast TV show years ago. That's where I actually heard about him, where he basically says all the fears or things inside us are really, all the dragons inside us are really princes or princesses wanting to be free. But what I think that means, and it ties into the fear thing, that sometimes good things come out of bad things, but again, fears are dragons. And he kind of talked about that, come to think of it too, in the paragraph above that one that I quote a couple of times in the book, that a lot of times the dragons we create in our lives are fears, and we create them, not necessarily life itself. So I think that's right, that the dragons sometimes we think are there in our lives are sometimes fears which may be rational, but sometimes they're pure emotional and irrational. But they're there nonetheless, and you have to deal with it.
I found the one called Dreams, the most personal of all of them.
Yeah.
From, from your point
From
of
my
view.
point, yeah.
Yes.
Right.
I really would like you to read the whole thing if you wouldn't mind.
I certainly will.
It's on page 87.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with you. This, I usually was writing stuff to her, but this one was as much about me. Okay, I'll begin now. Well, you had some vivid dreams when you have that you have told me about, and last night I had one. In it, something had happened to you. You were dead and gone. I felt lost and, of course, very upset and sad. My mom and sister were in the dream, trying to comfort me, but that did not help at all. All I wanted was to get you back. In the dream, I went outside. In my hand, I was holding what appeared to be a small cereal box. On its back was a photograph of you. Your hair was a bit different, shorter, and a bit curly, but it was you with your big, pretty eyes, maybe looking a bit younger like you do in some of the pictures in the box out in the garage. I kept looking at it, knowing you were not there. Then somewhere away from my mom and sister, I looked up at the sky, streaked with cirrus clouds, and kept crying out in tears, "Stephanie, Stephanie, Stephanie, please talk to me, Stephanie. Why are you gone?" Of course, you never answered back from the great beyond. I cried out to no avail, death being final and without a return. I just kept looking at the picture of you on the box, feeling my world was gone. Truly, emptiness filled my mind and heart in that alternate conjectural world, one unfamiliar but yet recognizable, even though totally unreal. Thankfully, I woke up, this was about 1:30 a.m., and I went into the kitchen, got a drink of juice, and shed a couple of little tears. That dream really shook me up, my dear. It was hard to get that picture of you from the dream out of my mind, but I went back to sleep and awoke with the alarm, of course, to find you still by my side, safe and sound, as you had been all night in our cozy bed that is usually used for sleeping, curled up with each other and making passionate love. Now, what does this dark visage from dreamland mean? Who knows? Maybe my subconscious mind was reacting to the combination of the latest turmoil with my kids and to us loving each other more than we ever did after our recent trip down south. Things being good with each other, does my inner self fear that I might lose you? You even asked recently if I ever got a feeling something bad was about to happen. Regardless of what mental currents made this flow forth from the sea of my deepest ego or id, it makes me realize even more that we should always enjoy each other and find great joy in the little things we see about each other. Every day we are together should be a celebration of what we have with each other, my love of all loves. Even amongst the sharp thorns that the darker rose bushes of life may shoot up into the quiet garden we tend together in marriage. Indeed, we have finally gotten it right, haven't we? We should treasure this fact without hesitation and enjoy the coming years we will have with one another.
I really liked that one.
Thank you.
Yeah. In having fun with each other, you say, quote, couples that are close and do stuff together do seem to stay together happily. Being in a vacuum or going off all the time to do your own thing does not seem to be conducive to really being a couple.
Yeah.
Do you still believe that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, that comes from a couple of things. I remember growing up, while my mom and dad had their own interests, like Mom was in this art club and volunteered, and my dad liked to go hunting and fishing, usually taking me. We still did many more things together as a family than we did not as a family. They always took us on vacation with them. I can only remember once when they went on a little weekend trip without us. You know, it was always the whole family together. So extending that to couples, doing stuff together, I think, builds bonds and bridges to the memories and the act of doing things together. I think sometimes in our culture, there's too much of an emphasis on me versus the we. And I think ultimately in cases that kind of get extreme or something, that me desire breaks up the we desire, I think. And I think media and other sources in the culture kind of contribute to that. But so I'm coming from that, from family memories, and also kind of what I see and interpret in our current culture.
Do you think your upbringing with such close-knit family and her upbringing without a family was part of the reason that this didn't work?
I think that's very possible, you know, because to me, extended families are always kind of convoluted and complicated, and they don't behave like you see in a textbook or on some talk show. That they really don't, you know, and it doesn't make them bad or crazy or anything like that. It's just family's kind of weird, and the blood's thicker than water when it comes to family versus with friends or stuff. So I think that was an issue, yes.
In Angst and Wonder, you say someone that loves you in all of the ways a wife should be loved. How should a wife be loved?
Well, at a high level, there's kind of two ways. You know, love them both mentally and emotionally, and also physically, because that whole thing together kind of makes the cake and the icing, as I use in that note, or one of the other ones. If you have just icing, that's a little too strong. If you have just cake, that's a little too dry. But the balance between the two, when it's done right, makes for a more pleasing plate, so to speak, to dine from, if you will. So that's where I'm kind of coming from on that. Yeah.
In kids and such, you talk about being bombarded with kids-oriented worries, and that was the choices and the kids seem to come throughout. And you say, this dichotomy of love for our kids and our inability to ensure a particular outcome for them, when we're invited to, is the ultimate thing that frustrates us. What was going through your mind then?
Well, going back to some of the stuff we talked about earlier, you know, the football game analogy, you know, as a parent, when you have a little kid, let's say they're sick or something, you drop everything, you take off work, you take them to the doctor, take them to the emergency room. Like my son was a 3-month preemie, so he went to the hospital more than once, and he was sick pretty frequently. Now he's grown and nice-looking young man, but as a parent, you're directly involved in either producing or ensuring a certain outcome. And that's not just in health and stuff like that. It goes to school, their hobbies, their friends, and just learning right from wrong. So that one is that note is another one of those where you're looking at the frustration that a parent can feel when they're transitioning from being able to, let's say, tell the kid what to do or make sure something happens the way you want it to again, watching what they do, and at best, maybe being able to give them just a little advice, which they may or may not take to heart or not.
Finally, seemed the most hopeful of all of them. What were you feeling when you wrote that one?
That one, it was like some of the others before. You know, there was periods of turmoil and some fussing with each other and stuff like that, and it was kind of a period where we felt like things had returned back to normal, that we'd hit our stride again and stuff like that. And, you know, even though I'm kind of a glass half full guy, I'm always hopeful things are going to work out and, you know, stuff like that. So that was kind of, again, a statement of we've had some bumps in the road and some rough times again, but looks like things are settled down and, you know, we're doing what we wanted to do like we had in the past.
In The Rain Today, you talked about the thunder and the parental bolts.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well,
I thought that was so clever.
Well, you know, if you know anything about weather and physics, well, when the lightning flashes, it expands the air, and then the thunder is caused when it comes back together, filling the void that the lightning caused. So parental is simply an allusion to that, or a reference to that the lightning is the parent of the thunder. The thunder's the child, in effect, to the lightning. So I guess I was just being kind of flowery in my language when I wrote that.
I thought it was very interesting. I'd never seen anything like that before.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about the sadness one feels? Because that's about
Yeah,
your daughter.
that's about my daughter. And out of all of our 4 kids, she's the youngest. Okay, and she was the last one, so to speak, to leave the nest.
Oh.
And Jennifer and I were always very close, and we still are. You know, she'll still talk to me, although some things she'll tell my mom versus, you know, some other people and stuff like that. But it was kind of the sadness I felt when I looked at this picture I took of her when she was about 8. And we were out in a field by a creek that kind of reminded me of a similar piece of land my grandfather had when I was little. And the picture's real cute of her. She's kind of doing this dramatic fashion drama page, you know, one hand up here and the other outstretched, and there she is, you know, about 8 years old in jean and this little shirt. And when I saw that picture, which I do every day because it's by my desk with other kid pictures, it was just kind of a feeling of sadness knowing that she was no longer a little girl anymore, that she was an adult like the rest of us with her, you know, whatever, foibles.
At least in her mind.
Well, yes, and she's still learning, but it was really a direct reference to me remembering what she was like when I took that picture of her many moons ago.
What would you like a reader to take away from your book?
Well, I think what I would like to take them away from it, you know, the book's not a self-help book. It doesn't preach anything really or anything like that. I think what people should get from it is when you have difficulties, you know, at this stage in life, and maybe sooner or later too, that most everybody goes through these things. And they go in cycles. It may be horrible one day, but in a day or two, you know, the sun could be shining again. So I think that's what I'd like them to get out of it, and maybe see things with a broader, maybe a little more philosophical picture on these things. So again, just knowing you're not the only one in this boat. There's tens of millions of others.
One thing that I have learned over the years is that there's always a gift in everything that happens.
Yeah.
And it's like you have to look for the gift oftentimes.
Yes, that's right.
Did you always know you would be a writer?
Not really. Now, when I was in junior high and high school, they had kind of a yearly literary book, and you would submit short stories and poems, and I would get some in those each year. Never got first place or anything, but it'd be like third place or honorable mention. But I knew I could write some. And then in college, I always made A's and sometimes a B in English, and got good grades on my creative writing papers. And then in grad school and stuff like that, I always got A's or B's on my papers, although they weren't creative. But as an adult, except for writing a few articles for an obscure hobby magazine, I never did any creative writing like this. Now, I did tons of writing for business, you know, documentation, proposals, requirements, but that's a totally different style. You know, it's very short and succinct, and you don't have a lot of the flowery language and stuff like that. But people always told me I was a good writer. And my mom said I should write a book. My sister told me that. And then one day I counted up how many of these notes I had. There's like 91 of them or so. I thought, well, I've got enough for a book. So that's when I started thinking about actually turning it into a real book.
So love is what got you started writing this way.
Yeah, not by a deliberate choice, but because of that, yes. That's right. Thank
Jeff,
you.
it's been such a pleasure talking with you today.
Appreciate
and
it.
hearing about your books, Notes to Stephanie, Middle-Aged Love Letters, and Life Stories. We're so glad you shared that with us today. Thank you for watching. This concludes Books in Review. I'm Emily Seate.